Hello guys and welcome to another video and welcome to the opening round of the exhibition season of the Manufacturers Cup. So here you can see that we had some pretty interesting conditions on the track, and if you don't know what is Manufacturers Cup, this is a competition where you can pick one manufacturer and run it for the whole season, or in this case it's 5 rounds and you need to use one manufacturer. Also, this was a race at Suzuka, and as I said before, it's the opening round, and for the whole season we got heavy damage, which means that if you damage your car in the race, you can only repair it in the pits, so the car is not automatically going to repair itself like it usually does when you have damage at light. So this meant that we had absolutely no contact in the first couple of, I think even the first couple of corners, even the first couple of laps. So everyone, I mean, I never saw something like this in the Manufacturers Cup, but everyone was super careful. I mean, if you make a mistake, that's pretty much game over. And also in this race, there was a combination of various strategies and various things that you can, of course, do, or you might even make a mistake and eventually just, you know, destroy your car, because the conditions were constantly changing. So we were going from completely dry conditions, you can see it's really sunny, to completely wet conditions, so full wet conditions. And yeah, it was hard to decide which strategy or, you know, which lap to pit, because, you know, you can gain an advantage if you pit a couple of laps later, but also at the same time, if you make a mistake on the wet part of the circuit, it meant that your race is pretty much over. You're not going to be able to recover. And you can see some clouds started to appear. It was about lap 5, and I knew it was going to be pretty much the same thing as Amsterdam Showdown Finals. So we got 35 laps, which is, you know, the longest race that I've ever done, I think, in the competitive GT7, I would say. Maybe in some leagues I did a little bit more or less. It was about 70 minutes in total. I think it was a little bit more than that, but in general it was a really long race, and you know, it was really hard to keep track of all of the changes and all of the things that were constantly changing, like weather conditions. So yeah, wind, for example, this meant that the car isn't going to be able to stop at that specific point each and every single lap. So you had to adapt. So if the wind changes, you can carry a little bit more speed onto the straight, which means once again you have to brake slightly earlier or later, depends on the speed, of course. But in this case, I was just expecting rain, and I had this Italian behind me. He was really pushing at this point. He was, you know, he was much faster in some sections, but then on the straights he wasn't really able to kind of get closer to me, as I was always better on the way out. So in general, he was kind of competitive in these slow sections of the track. I was running, by the way, the Mazda, and Mazda is not like the best car in slower turns, but it's kind of okay. I decided to pick this one because why not? I mean, let's see what Mazda can do. And in this case, Suzuka isn't the best combination. I think the best lap that someone posted was a 59.5 in the qualifying, which was only top 50 or top 40 in the world. Usually, if you want to be really competitive, you need to get at least like a top 15, top 20. So this car was definitely not the car for the race. And you can see, lap 10, it did start to rain a little bit on some parts of the circuit. So that's why I said in the beginning of the video, you had a couple of things that you could have done. But I think the optimum strategy was definitely not pitting in lap 10, because you will burn your tires. Jack did exactly that. So he pitted a lap or two too early, which means that now in these dry conditions he's just gonna burn those intermediates. So intermediates are not really great on dry circuit. It's just not the way they're supposed to perform. And in this case, you can see that on some parts of the circuit it's dry, it's really dry, but on some parts of the circuits it's wet. It's getting like really wet. You have to be really careful and just avoid those curbs. Use a different line, eventually just adapt to a situation. And I even started using TCS2 because it was almost impossible to control the car. And in this case, Colster was just in front. I think he made a little mistake going out of the hairpin, and yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I was saying in the beginning. Only one mistake and you can lose it all. In this case, he was still on the track, but he lost, I think, about even 2 seconds just by that one little mistake. So in this case, you know, I decided to stay out for one lap longer and see what can I do? Callister decides to go into the pits as well as a couple of other drivers, and I saw even Callister and Antonio went into the pits, and I started using TCS2, which I was also using in the previous lap, and it just wasn't good enough. I couldn't keep control of the car. So only this section was wet at this point, so and maybe a couple of corners before it, but nothing too significant. You can still use the hard tires or the slicks, and just by that little mistake I lost even more than that, more than half a second, and I was given a half a second penalty. So we're getting into the pits, yeah, pretty much. I think it was kind of the last call, lap 12 and lap 13. You just couldn't done it anymore. It was raining too heavily. So half a second penalty now, and I even overtook Callister through the pits. So the optimum strategy for this race was pit lap 12. 11 was a safe option, as you can see. I kind of got a penalty. Callister didn't. He was able to hold on and, you know, just get his place and, you know, just stay pretty much clean. And in this case meant that I was gonna lose it. I was definitely gonna lose this place onto the straight, because half a second is not half a second, it's more like 1.5. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of looking good at this point, but I mean, it's still at the same time I lost one place. Half a second penalty, 35 laps. It's not something significant, of course. It's, you know, you never really want to get a penalty, but, you know, I'm gonna live, I'm gonna move on, and, you know, I'm gonna focus on the rest of the race. And as you can see, it started to rain pretty heavily. So in this kind of conditions, it's hard to adapt, because you never really know where the level of the grip is. And yeah, if I get a lot of questions, I actually got a lot of questions, why am I using TCS and why I'm using TCS even when it's not raining. Mazda requires a lot of TCS, so you cannot really run the car optimum at that optimum pace without the TCS on hards and mediums. Softs can be kind of okay, but yeah, mediums and hards are not really that great. So yeah, in this case, you can really see that Callister is really struggling that section as well as I did. I mean, this is one of those corners where you're just carrying so much speed, then it's almost impossible to see, okay, if I'm gonna make it or I'm not gonna make it. So it's just about either you're gonna stop too soon, you're gonna lose half a second to about a second because you stopped too soon, or you're just gonna go flat out and risk it all. So it was really a tough decision, or a tough thing to do, because you never really know what is the optimum when you're racing. Later, when you watch the replay, everything seems like, oh, okay, I should have done this, I should have done that. But, and you know, when you're doing this, when you're racing, it's really hard to, you know, see all of those things that are changing around you and adapt to them. So yeah, TCS2 I think at this point was the safest option, and the safest option was, you know, not push it that hard, still be able to brake kind of, let's say, consistently, but don't lose the car. Like, for example, I almost lost there, and just one more time you can see that the car is really struggling to turn, and I almost once again went off the track. It was like super scary of these, let's say, lap 15 to lap 18. And you can see Callister is really struggling in front of me, especially on those heavy braking points. And if you miss your braking point even slightly, you're just sliding. There is no coming back from that. You cannot really say, okay, I'm just gonna take it easy from now on, because you're sliding and there is no control in that. So lap 16, the things got even worse, and you can see my my driving style actually changed quite a lot. So I'm not using the curbs anymore. I'm not pushing as much as I was pushing in the normal dry conditions, and basically if you touch the curb you will start sliding away. So it's not optimal. It's really not something that you want to do in the rain, and especially if it's raining heavily like this. So this was full wet conditions. So when the bar goes over, let's see, this 65%, or if it's like the last third, you can run the fully wet tires. But then in the end, when the track dries out, wet tires are not optimal. So I just had to survive for the next 2 to 3 laps, and then later I had much more pace and wet tires. So yeah, there was no point of using wet tires. And then I saw yellow flags, and Antonio spun, and I watched the replay in the end, and he spun on the way out of that corner. He wasn't using TCS, and you know, the car just, you know, the car started sliding. He couldn't control it. It was basically like driving on ice, and he also had damage. I didn't save the replay, which yeah, I don't know, it was like 250 megabytes, and I didn't have, this was like a long race, and in this case I really didn't want to wait. I was like, okay, he has damage, he does not have the acceleration, I'm just gonna go for it. The car started understeering like crazy, and I think I even pushed him a little bit off the circuit, and yeah, I don't think this was good from my end, but I should have waited until this straight. But in the end, I overtook Antonio and made it into P7. So at this point, my race is looking pretty decent, and a couple of laps later, I caught on to Jack, and this is what I was talking about in the, let's say, I think it was lap 10 when he pitted. So if you stay on intermediate tires when it's not raining, when you have these dry conditions, you're just gonna destroy your intermediates, and then later in the rain you will have a tough time controlling the car. He had this Genesis, which is a really good car. I mean, I never thought this Genesis was gonna be such a great car to drive, and he had so much straight line speed, but unfortunately those intermediates just were not in that optimal position, so they were really used, and you can see that he's really struggling to keep the car onto the track. And then I saw, okay, this is my chance, I will eventually get this position. I just gotta get really close to him, and if I don't make a mistake, if I don't crash or do something, if I don't do something crazy, it's gonna be okay. So I will get this position. I just gotta be patient. So I didn't have to be patient for such a long time, and you know, it's kind of difficult to see what he's doing and what I'm doing, because you know, you're always trying to push as hard as you possibly can. But here I started braking even before the 150. I think he was slightly too late on the brakes and going wide, so those intermediates just couldn't hold it any longer, and I got myself into P6. So this was, you know, I started in P8, and just, you know, 2 places in these conditions with these drivers, I think it was fair to say that I was quite confident, and I might even get a couple of places later. So it was looking pretty good, not gonna lie. P6, and you can see that lap 21 the track really started to dry out, so it was constantly changing conditions, and then I kind of saw that, okay, maybe it's time, you know, maybe it's time to pit, but maybe it's too early. So if you touch the curb, if you go outside of this dry line, you will eventually make a huge mistake, and there is no recovery from that. You will damage your car, and the race is pretty much over. You will probably spin, and then with a spin, with a penalty, with just the damage that you have, there is no point. But then I saw Romero, Nico was in the pits, and I thought, okay, maybe it's too early. I don't see where is he gonna pick up all of that time. I mean, it's still wet. It's still really wet. But I saw a couple of other guys pit it, and then I realized that he's really getting a lot of time on me. So it was about 8 seconds when he got out of the pits, and just in a couple of corners the gap was going down quite fast. I mean, in the end it was not even 6 seconds. So in that lap he gained about, I would say even 2 seconds just by using that dry line. So yeah, I decided to get into the pits, and this was the scariest moment, because yellow flags in here. I used TCS4 because it was still wet on this part. I mean, I was on the slicks, and it's incredibly easy to spin like that. So yeah, you just had to be careful when you're going out of the pits, and never use the curbs. And I kind of clipped the curb there, but it was kind of okay. And TCS, once again, it was at 1. I kind of thought about maybe using 2, but yeah, I told myself I want to be quick at the same time. I don't want to be like really abusing that TCS and not getting the benefit of it. And then the Hungarian, he made that mistake. He got a 3-second penalty for spinning out of the pits. I wish I could show you the replay, but unfortunately I couldn't save it. The file was just too big. And yeah, that was one more place, and that's what I actually wanted to get out of this whole race. P5, and then I saw these guys in front. They were really fighting for it, and then I see Fento disappearing. And later someone, okay, the Hungarian guys showed me the replay, which I really have to thank them for showing the replay. And I saw Fento and Nico made that little tap, and that meant it was pretty much game over for Fento, and he rage quitted. So I was in P4, and you can see that the track at this point is really starting to dry out. So it's like dry conditions at this point. So there is no point of, no point of staying on the intermediates. Just not even intermediates, not even using or not using the whole track. It was starting to get really dry, and in these conditions, just use your normal braking points, adapt to that, and start using the curbs once again. You can really see that once again I'm using the curbs, not exactly 100%. I wasn't quite confident to use it 100%, but then I started catching up to Nico, and at this point I thought, okay, maybe there is a slight chance to get a podium in this race, as he was really struggling and he had some damage in the end. That's what I saw on the replay. And once again, as I previously said, that I started once again using the curbs. They weren't exactly dry, but they were kind of okay, so you could use them in a couple of cases. But you know, I think at this point it was starting to get optimal to start using the curbs instead of not using them. So you know, the gap was going down quite significantly, so it was 1.6, 1.7. He made this little mistake right here. He almost lost the car, and I thought, like, oh man, this is gonna be okay, this is gonna be really close. And by the end it was less than a second, but I just couldn't. And I mean, I wish I had one more lap. 36 laps would be optimum, and I probably could have got that place. But in the end, I'm quite happy with P4, and it's something that I can be really happy with. So P4 going from P8 with all of the things that were going on the circuit, and it was, you know, at one point I thought this was absolute madness. I mean, just trying to keep the car onto the track in these conditions, it's kind of tough. Not to mention that, you know, I had a couple of slides that were not planned. But then later I've watched, of course I watched the points ranking, and I'm actually leading in my manufacturer. So it's, you know, it's P1 in the manufacturer, P9 in the region, which seems pretty crazy at this point. But no, I'll see by the end of the season what if I can hold on to this place, and we only count for the first or the best 3 rounds. So this, I would say, this is like a pretty decent round so far. So guys, I hope that you enjoyed in this one. If you did, you can even hit the like button. You might even want to subscribe. So that's pretty much about it. Until the next time, bye.